Welcome in, folks, to another great episode of I've Got a Theory. I'm your host, Henish, and I'm joined by Bobby Esparza. Am I saying your name right, Bobby?
It is
Yeah,
Esparza. You're probably one of
Esparza.
the first ones to get that right.
Yeah, Esparza. So Bobby is the host of Friday Detox, where they have positive spins to the news and media. So check out his show. I'm excited to have him on because he's got something that I think we can all agree on, especially after a few minutes of conversation. Bobby, take it away. Tell us your theory.
All right. We'll jump straight into it. Again, Bobby, Friday Detox podcast. My theory being that we're all much more united than people in the news would have us believe, and people within structures of power would have us believe. There's a lot of ways we can go down a lot of maybe conspiracy theory rabbit holes. You've heard stuff about like Great Reset and the World Economic Forum and all this stuff out there. But I think when you boil it down, I think that Henish, you and I, and then people in this audience, ultimately, if we just strip everything away from our opinions, preconceived notions about whatever it is we've decided to stand up for or stand against, when you boil it down, we all tend to have the same basic principles that we lean on.
Yeah. So tell me some of those principles that you think are foundational for people.
Well, right and wrong, honoring your elders, things like that, things that I think people would consider much more traditional America. Um, if there is an absence of it in today's world, it's not necessarily for the better. We've traditionally as a country looked to our, whether it's our founders or historical heroes, people who did great things. We just passed up June 6th, D-Day. And so we look back on those people like you and me, just I think the average age was 18 to 35, enlisted, and they went and they decided, I'm gonna die on this hill of freedom. And so what we see a lot in society is much more now focused, much more me focused. But if you really, when we look back to how we were raised and what do we fall back on during hard times? We just came through the virus. One of the things that I saw more than anything, if you want to put a positive spin on it, was we were forced into our homes and we had to reconnect with family. So
Yep.
whether you're left leaning, right leaning, centrist, or whatever extreme you might be on, it seemed like we all came back to this point of, wow, family's great. It's an amazing concept. But yeah, it was everybody seemed pretty content to have at least been able to reestablish that connection.
So, Bobby, why does it seem that our elected officials, locally, nationally, etc., and the media
Mhm.
seem to relish showing how different and opposite everyone is?
Ooh, that's a
and,
good
and
one.
especially especially the political establishment. People vote along party lines almost every time,
Mhm.
and so it's like, and they're two sides of the same coin. Ideally, everyone wants America to advance forward, but the rabbit hole I'd go down is that there's other agenda involved more so than kumbaya and getting everyone to get along.
Oh yeah. Agenda is a great word to use. Everybody's got an agenda. I think we've all got, whether it's a philanthropist type agenda or if it's more self-serving, we all have some sort of an agenda. So if you translate that to, yes, there are people who are in power, whether it's elected or not. There's actually a very large piece of our government, of our entire structure, that is not an elected position. They're all appointed. You can call it deep state, you can call it just our system in general, whatever you want to call it, but there are people in power. And if my career pursuit is to, let's say, join the military, and I'm going to do the next 4, 10, 20 years of service to my country, well, that's one route to take. Another route would be political power. And you can approach any sort of life calling from any number of motivations. So if you're going into political power, you can go in as a public servant. That's great. We've all heard of the great public servants. We've all got, I'm sure, plenty in our heads that we could point to. But the flip side of that coin, like you said, is that there are people who go there as self-serving. They're in there for power. And I think most of us have heard the term divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And I think that's pointing towards what you were saying is of a why, like why keep us divided? Well, it's a lot easier to control when you don't have a unified opposition,
Yeah.
right? And so that's
Yeah.
what
Because if
I'd
everyone's
say
like,
the
yeah, you
why.
can kind of get along, and what we don't want. Well, because the fact is that politicians think they go into it for power, but at the end of the day, they become puppets to the people that pay for their campaigns. True or
And
false?
at many times, absolutely, absolutely.
Is it many times or is it every time?
I wouldn't say every time.
Really? Who are the
I'm
exceptions?
optimistic enough to believe that. Let's say I jumped into political power, I
Yeah.
wouldn't want that opinion thrust on me, like, hey, you're just doing it because of whoever's giving you money. There's ways to look at that. You can look at it as I tend to lean towards what is the average dollar amount of a donation. Is it $20, $50, $100? Let's say it's $5. Well, then that's somebody who's pulling in grandma who doesn't have $20 to give to a political campaign, but she just have five. And so that tells you something.
But there's so many ways to manipulate that data too, right? Because you could
Oh,
be like, oh
absolutely.
yeah, that's my campaign money that I'm getting from individuals, but my PAC money, sure, it comes from pharmaceuticals and big oil,
Mm-hmm.
right? But I'm not disclosing that because for my campaign, my average donation is $5.
Mm-hmm.
But my PAC gets $100,000 at a time from big pharma. So we don't have to
Sure.
disclose that because that's not affiliated with me by law. I'm not in control or have any, uh, uh, direct affiliation with my PAC, right? My politically campaign. What is it called? Political Action Campaign.
Political Action
Yeah,
Committee.
political action. So that so that's the loophole. You get a PAC in place. It takes all the money, and you can say whatever you want. I can't think of any politician, local, national, or otherwise, that doesn't have an agenda.
No, absolutely. And agenda doesn't have to be bad. Agenda doesn't. It could be a good agenda. Let's say you're going and you're into office, and I heard this a whole lot during Trump. Like him or hate him, people were saying that he's just playing to his base. He's just playing to his electorate. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell is he supposed to do? What's any politician supposed to do if he gets put into office? Is he supposed to appeal to the people who have already got their ears turned off to him, or does he appeal to the people who put him in office? Does what he says he said he was going to do, and then use that as further fuel to attract more of that centrist. You got your what am I trying to say? Like your far right, your far left. You're never going to persuade those people to give up what they believe.
Why not? Why not? Because most of these beliefs are fluid, anyways. People
That's
think
what
they
I mean.
believe
When
something until they
you're
find something else out.
extremists,
What's
I'm
that?
talking extremists. I'm talking outliers. I'm saying people who've decided just not because of reason, not because of morals, not because of principles or anything that we could unite around, purely because this is the hill I'm choosing to die on, and this is what I'm going to say I believe, even if I couldn't even produce a single fact to back it up. That's just who I am. They define themselves by political opinion. It's maybe you can get a handful of them, but it's not necessarily. I wouldn't think um, a fight to really invest in to try to persuade those people, when really the vast majority of the company is what you just said, fluid, and they can move back and forth, and that's how our system operates. I saw an amazing quote, and let me try and get it right. I expect liberals to seem, and I'm going to paraphrase this, I'm going to butcher it, and I'm so sorry. His name is Dan Holloway. He hosts another very large podcast. Well, I won't give them a plug here, but his name is Dan Holloway. And basically, I want somebody who's far left to appear far left when that side of the country has just pushed. I don't know if you've heard of Overton window, but the right looks much more far right the further our norm moves left, and vice versa. And so you would expect somebody to look far right when that is the direction that we're moving away from. It's like, so you're way over there, but in reality, we used to be over there. So that's how our system is set up to work. Is I'd expect somebody to look out of the loop if what they're doing is out of the loop. It
Yeah,
doesn't
I mean,
mean
so
right or
like,
wrong.
Senator Marjorie Taylor Greene is prime example, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Right. I mean, so she's an example of far right, and I would think that most people that are right or Republican kind of cringe. I'm like, crap, I hate that she's representing us. And
Sure. Sure.
when
And I would say, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off
yeah,
there.
no, it's fine. I mean, it's just one of those things. Like it's tough because people on both sides look at the lowest common denominator on either side and say, look at this person, they're bad because they're protesting deaths of black people, and look at this person, they're bad because they are disrespecting black people. Whatever it could be.
Sure.
Whatever issue it is, but you're taking the extremes of either side and saying that's what we're up against. At least that's what the media portrays. When back to your theory, the fact is that most of us, if you put us in a Venn diagram, would agree on 80% of things, right? We
Oh,
don't want
absolutely.
people
Yeah.
to die. We don't want people to starve to death. We want less taxes. We want better access to education. We want clean drinking water. We wish our roads were better, et cetera, right? I mean, these are all things we want,
Yeah, you're
regardless of
talking
whether
things
you're
that
right or left.
Americans have agreed on for decades now, things that have been touted as this is, the American dream, or whatever you want to say it is. But then what we've done is, in the example of, let's say, a Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I don't think that she's necessarily somebody that anybody even kind of identifies as left should be afraid of, because when I look at anything she says, it's not even cringe. It's more just like, oh, like it's so sensationalist. It is so that I don't even know if she necessarily believes what she is saying she believes. It's more of just like a hey,
She wants
look
a
at
shock
me.
factor. She wants a
Shock factor, exactly. And how
and it
does a
gets her
Donald
publicity,
Trump
gets her
win?
on the news.
Oh yeah, exactly. It gets followers, and what it does is people who were already kind of leaning in that direction now associate her with whatever it is they already decided they believe. And so it's not necessarily that she represents them. It's more of like a manufactured, a personal, hey, I'm going to look to this person as a representative of X, Y, and Z, when really they're not. And it's just nobody's exposing that.
So, Bobby, what's this information do for us? How does this help us? How does it advance us, knowing that, hey, more people are similar than and more united than we think it is, especially as portrayed by the media and or the government?
Great question. I think it puts it on ourselves. I see podcasts all the time now that have a decent following. Something I say on mine all the time is that we are all influencers. You're an influencer, whether it's a micro influencer of 1,000 people or if it's 1.5 million. We are all influencing. So the call to action from my theory is that if somebody's telling us we're divided, and I don't believe we are divided, the next logical step is to stop listening to those voices.
Mm-hmm.
And so CNN is CNN because they've always been CNN, but that doesn't mean that the values they once stood for are the values that they're upholding now. And that could be Fox, that could be MSNBC, any of those. And so what does that mean for us? Well, that means that we're a lot more powerful than we thought we were. Our voices matter a lot more than those who have the loud podiums would want us to believe.
Is that it's tough because when people look at the political landscape and say, okay, yeah, I want to do this, or no, I don't. I just had this conversation who's chief of staff for a senator here in California. And she's like, I don't know if I could do politics anymore. It's a grind. It wears on me. It wears on my soul. I hate that we've taken oil money and now she can't stand up for that because she won't say anything against, pollution or climate change because she can't, because she's paid,
Yep.
And so it's tough. And now my friends that are in the business, they're like, I don't know if I could do this anymore because it just wears on your soul. So like, how do you get someone into it that wants to do it for the right reasons? Because everyone that seems to want to do it is because they're power hungry, or they think that gives them power or motivation, or some measure of success or notoriety.
Mm-hmm.
And all the while they're getting their strings pulled by people that are paying them, right? It's like the president may be on paper the strongest person in the world, but like there's people that are still telling them what to do, right? There's still people probably in the CIA, in his lobby groups, in his political party that say, nope, you have to do this or that because of XYZ reason. Otherwise, you might disappear. Who knows? Or whatever,
Sure.
whatever the consequence might be. And so that's the bigger thing. So like, I don't know how optimistic I am that people are going to come out of this in the next 5, 10, 20 years and solve this problem. in terms of dividing us and making us further divided than ever before. So I'll bring up a contentious one: gun control, right? I mean, this is something that there's very few people that are like in between, like, oh yeah, we should have handguns but not assault guns. There's kind of like, yeah, a little bit of that, but at the same point, like, any gun can kill a bunch of people very quickly.
Doesn't have to be a gun.
Yeah.
It could be a blunt force object. It could be a knife.
For sure. You could take your car and drive into a crowd of 30 people and smoke them all. For sure. It's just easier and a little bit more maneuverable to do it with a gun. So, I mean, there's this conversation of gun control, and it's like, I don't know if this ever gets solved, right? People say we're going to do stricter measures for background checks and things like that. It doesn't matter. Every day there's a shooting from someone that's killing someone.
And I'll interject there. In a few examples that you brought up, I think that when we're having the problem of, okay, who do we send to Washington, D.C., this small little piece of a massive country with massive resources and massive diversity, who do we send to D.C. to change all of that for all of us? If we're having that conversation, my argument is it's already too late. If you're arguing of who in Washington, D.C. that has never met me before, has never met anybody from my little town of Bernie. I grew up in Bandera, Texas, cowboy capital of the world. Have they ever been to Bandera? Has whoever's in charge of the border right now, have they ever been to the southern border of my state? So that's the problem. It's not a matter of how do we make them do what it is we want to do. It's take their power away. Take the power back to the states. If some state wants to be like, oh, marijuana, it's the devil's lettuce, it's the worst thing in the world, we can never legalize marijuana. Well, then fine. I'm going to go to a state that has legalized it because I want to smoke marijuana. If that's something that I really believe in, or let's say it's gun control. I believe that this state, whatever it is too strict on gun rights. So I'm going to go to a state that is looser on gun rights. That's how our system was set up to work. It wasn't meant to be exactly what we rebelled against in the first place back in the 1700s. What we rebelled against was, you're going to do this, whether you like it or not. And if you try not to do it, well, we're just going to tax you out of existence.
So you think that one of the options is that you could relocate states that better suit your leanings in terms of what you believe?
Well, not relocate the state, relocate the person.
You relocate where you live. Sure. Yeah. Because states have their own rights to an extent, right? I mean, there's still federal rights, and then there's states' rights as well, in terms of like whatever laws supersede, right? But you're right. I mean, the marijuana example is prime example. Like, it's still federally illegal, but it's basically totally legal in like 20 plus, 30 plus states now.
Yeah. And then what happens is the marketplace of ideas, if you take a capitalistic sort of approach to the marketplace of ideas, well, then you're met with, so now 20 something states have tried it and it's worked. Things are falling into place. The infrastructure is great. They're receiving tax dollars. Roads are being repaired. Schools are getting extra funding, blah, blah, blah. Well, now every other state who hasn't done that yet, now they have to tell their constituents, this is why we haven't done it, or, hey, we're going to start doing this because it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And it's a slow process. And that's not what people want to hear. People do not want to hear this is going to take time, but that is exactly how our system was set up to work, was slowly. Because if it works quickly, then it sways back and forth every 4 years. And then that's where we get to exactly where we're at now.
Bobby, do you think there's any media outlets that are actually fair and unbiased and actually just report the facts?
Unbiased is tough. Even in my own podcast, it's really tough to approach a news source and just be unbiased. It's almost impossible for most people. I don't
what about
see
like
a lot of,
what about like AP News or Reuters or something like that? I feel like when they report stuff, it's like just cut and dry. Here's what happened, and it doesn't give you any.
That. AP has definitely tried to take that approach. I follow, most would call them more right-leaning, and I look at the headlines, and I'll tell you, I wish I'd thought about it before. Out of Canada, there's this one I saw on Instagram, and I followed them just because I was curious. But what they do is they post a headline, and then you scroll through 3 extra little photos. One is a left-leaning source with their headline. One's a center, which is usually a Reuters, an AP, or a The Hill is usually a good middle of the road. And then you swipe further and you get a right link, you get a Daily Wire, you get a Breitbart or the Blaze or something like
Is
that.
this a website you know of? What's that called?
Yeah. Do you mind if I look at my phone real
Yeah,
fast?
go for it. Yeah, because I'm
Let me see if I
interested.
can
Because I,
find it on Instagram.
I thought that'd be a useful thing to have, is where you have a media source that says, here's the three sources. You pick and choose which side you want to believe.
Yeah, I'll tell you, they're called Ground News, all spelled out.
GROUND news.
Yep, all spelled out, based in Canada. And so I'm looking at one right here, and it's funny, we were just talking about this. Their first is the split headline: U.S. judge overturns California's ban on assault weapons. Then you swipe, you get a Washington Post: California's assault weapons ban overturned as federal judge compares AR-15 to a Swiss Army knife. Then you get an AP headline, and then you get a Daily Wire. So you kind of get to see, and then what they also put out is that they'll put out a graphic and it'll say blind spot for the right. And it's usually something that a bunch of left-leaning news media is reported on, but nobody from the right reported on.
Uh-huh.
And so you see something like, wow, I never would have seen that other than for Ground News. So I've been thrilled since I found them, actually.
Well, that's a great resource. I mean, that makes all of this that much more worth it, because it's good to be able to see it, right? Because, I got an opportunity to live overseas for business about 15 years ago. And it was interesting reading the local news there describing events in America. And I was like, I wouldn't have thought of it described that way. Because when I read the news online, this is what it said in the US. But now
Yeah.
reading it from a foreign publication describing the same thing is a different event.
Oh yeah, you would never believe. I like to look at I think it's Sky News from Australia, and they almost poke fun at us throughout all of our entire election cycle. It's like, look at these people. It's almost like a bunch of sharks, just this blood in the water that we flock towards, and all the while, the people who are actually pulling the strings and manipulating the levers of power, they're on the outskirts doing whatever they want to do, while we're doing this feeding frenzy, not realizing we're feeding on each other, and the people who are manipulating us are just sitting back and watching it all go down, basically.
Here's my big concern, Bobby. Can we keep the planet healthy enough for us to live on it for a long time until we find an alternative option for a place to live besides planet Earth?
Well, if you ask Elon Musk, he says we've already lost that battle. That's why he's trying to get us to Mars. There's certain things, and I learned this with my wife. My wife would bring up stuff about pregnancies, or some of those things that we've got to start having discussions about. What would we do in this circumstance if, let's say, I'm pregnant and the baby is preterm, and they tell us it's either the wife or the child? What do we do? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not in a position where I could say right now, this is what I would do. And so I say that to say, with climate change, I don't know. I don't know enough to say, hey, this is what we are supposed to do. What I do believe is that we have enough differing opinions within the scientific community to say that, I don't like hearing people say the science is settled. It's not. We're still looking. We're still trying to figure things out. What level of natural climate change and warming and cooling does our globe go through in its cycle? We like to look at cycles as small as we can make them. A cycle doesn't have to be 365 years or days. It can be 365 years. The cycle of a planet within a cosmic solar system of massive bodies revolving around a sun. To try and approach that from any sort of level of certitude is, to me, is I don't even know the right word, prideful, or it's kind of putting our brains on a pedestal I don't think they belong on.
Yeah, I guess. I guess the real concern is that you can see how. So let me give you a prime example. I'm Indian ethnically, and I like watching the Gordon Ramsay Uncharted show, where he travels around the world, learns niche cooking techniques, and then tries to beat a local chef at their cooking game, right? So he goes to India, to the state where I'm from, and there's 27 states in India, and then they go fishing in the ocean, right? And there's 20 guys throwing nets out, and they literally bring in nothing 2 or 3 times, right? The fish are gone, right? And this is a real problem, because there are places in the world where you can prove that 20, 30, 50 years ago, there was so much fish in the water, you couldn't put your hand in without getting hit by them, right? Because it's that thick. And now we've fished them out, or they've polluted out, or they've something else has changed. Literally, when you pulled in nets, they were getting trash. Like that was it. And then like a tiny little, little things like that. And then I remember last time I went to visit with my family about 4 years ago, you see these lush trees, you see these lush forests, you see these lush landscape, and you see these thick rivers through India, throughout all of it, a lot of India, especially in the South, where it's a lot more lush than when people think of, oh, India's deserts and stuff. And like, it's a pretty diverse country. So everything exists. Mm-hmm. And I asked my parents, I was like, how come no one fishes in these rivers? I'm not an avid fisherman, but I like to fish. And I was like, how come no one fishes in these rivers? Oh, there's no fish. Those have died long, long ago. These rivers are way too polluted for that. There's no fish in the rivers? That's incredible, right? I mean, so that, so you can see this in micro areas, kind of, it's still a big area that serves 100+ million people, versus, in the middle of Alaska where, the salmon are stocked and running well because it's less influenced by people. So you see these kind of things happening, and so it's like science and science, right? The science shows there's no fish in these rivers because people killed them. It's not because they decided to not live there anymore. It's because the water's not safe for them anymore. So you have these kind of things happening, and so I hate when the politics tries to subside that people do cause effects that do damage the environment and our planet, and they can be reversed, much to Elon's plans. I know he likes to portray that it's going to be all downhill so he can get some motivation for people to get off the planet a little bit. But at the same point, we have to kind of protect this one until we can figure out how to terraform Mars, right? We can't live in glass bubbles for the rest of our lives times 7 billion people on another planet, because we'll fuck that. We'll screw that one up too. How did that one out? But like, and I think screw that one up too, unless we change our ways and learn to be a little bit more practical with what we've got in our current home.
And I think that your approach to it is something that we can unite around. But the problem I see is the extremes. Again, there's the extreme of, you getting in your SUV is causing irreparable global climate change that is resulting in these things.
Sure.
Meanwhile, of course, we have to also acknowledge that half of those people saying that are flying around in jets. I don't own a private jet. A lot of them do, or at least have access. But then you got the other side, the other extreme, which is I should be able to do exactly whatever I want to do. I don't have to worry about the planet, and it's just going to take care of itself. I don't believe in either one of those. It's somewhere in the middle. But when all we can do is focus on the loudest voices, but we're not able to really focus on the problem. And I think what has happened is, like you said, you're not a fisherman. I'm not really much of a hunter, but my family's full of them. And I'd say some of the most environmentally concerned people I've ever met are hunters.
100%. Same with fishermen. Yeah, same. Absolutely. If you're an outdoorsman, you're an environmentalist.
Absolutely. I love that you said that. That's absolutely true, because there's an affinity, there's an appreciation for the outdoors, for the planet, for nature itself.
And even with fishing, they always make sure it's to size. We caught a halibut the other day. My buddy's like, check out what the legal size is. And I was like, oh, it's 22 inches. It was on the spot, but it's the point. He's like, oh, they calculate that by the time that the fish are this old, they have spawned 10,000 offspring, or whatever the number is. So they had a chance to kind of replenish before you took them out of the water and ended their lives to turn it into a fish taco.
Sure. And you can look at the same as for forests. If a tree's cut down, what does it take to replace that resource? Whether it be naturally, or if it is us planting more trees, or cultivating more areas where they can grow and things like that. Sure, there's so much we can do. I think the harm comes in, though, is just like with anything, is when we over generalize.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Just people that they decide that because of where you're from or how you vote, that this is what you believe, and therefore you are a danger to the planet, or you're a danger to democracy, or you're a danger to whatever it might be.
I agree. I think our micro actions don't make as much of an effect. When you find out things like cruise ships pollute as much as a large city, and we let them float around in the oceans, it's the same air we breathe. They just don't regulate them because they're chartered to, random countries that are islands off the Caribbean, that don't have any environmental regulations. So it's those kind of things. Or, that farming takes up 60 to 70% of our water. Meanwhile, we have to have low flow water faucets and showers and sprinklers. My wife's like, I want more water through our shower. I'm like, we're in California. We're limited to 1.25 gallons per minute. That's it,
Wow, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can't buy
Huh.
shower fixtures or bathroom fixtures from other states because they don't necessarily meet the low flow requirements of California. So you can't do that kind of trade, which, is nice. It's incremental changes, but the fact is that our farming and flooding farm fields for water wastes a humongous amount more when there are better techniques. It's just people are slow to change on those things, right? So they're saying, oh, California is in a drought. Well, yeah, we just flood fields for everything. And that was just a technique that worked when we were abundant with water, maybe, or no one ever thought that we'd ever run out of fresh water. But
Right.
that can be the case, and we're proving that places are droughting and that we're having fires at a much faster pace than we did 10 or 20 years ago. Maybe it's cyclical, but it's probably also man-made. And it's also because we're not respecting that fires do happen naturally or not. And when you put developments next to it, houses get burned down.
Yeah, and I also saw a report about how, well, first, there was a number of verified arson, people setting the fires. So that's one contributing factor. But then two, part of conservation, part of preserving a forest is allowing controlled fires, because a fire is a natural, I don't know what to call it, like a preservation for the forest. There are natural forest fires.
Yeah, it's like a cleaning. It's like a spring cleaning. They come through, it gets rid of the
Cleansing,
old growth, it allows new growth to come through. I know some plants and seeds and insects and stuff rely on it for various reasons. It's just when it gets out of control or if it's kind of damaging, entire ecosystems and it can't recover from it type thing. But
yeah, it's terrible.
the planet kind of knows what it's doing. So yeah, we see these kind of things. Okay, so let's get back on task. We are more united than we believe.
Sure. Yeah.
And so now we have to take that information and make sure that when people meet up, maybe the idea is that you find common ground before you agree on what you disagree on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I
bet there's a lot of things that we could find for common ground. Sometimes you got to really slice away at who you are as a person to really find that foundational piece. And sometimes it might just be the fact that we're both Americans.
Yeah.
And that used to be something that would, well us up with pride. And we could say, hey, at least we're both American. But there's a problem that I see, and that nowadays, even that identity is being demonized and washed away. And that's
it's been tough. I mean, honestly, I think, whether you love him or hate him, Trump did a lot of damage. Like now when we see people rolling around with a bunch of American flags, we're like, crap, is that guy, going to be, an aggressive right-wing type person? Am I concerned about it? Because in my own community, every 2 weeks on the beach near where I live in San Diego, they're doing Republican Trump rallies. Mm-hmm. And almost every time someone gets hurt for something. So I'm like, I have to tell my family to keep clear just because I don't want them to accidentally be pulled into a scuffle of some sort, because I got small kids, so it's unfortunate that that's the case, that people have to get violent to prove their point when the pen is much mightier than the sword, right?
Oh, and you could take the exact same standpoint. I totally agree with you, 100%. And you have to be able to apply that same standard to a protest over police brutality. Can we just protest?
Yeah, any kind of protest or mass gathering, right? Any kind of mass gathering of any sort, left or right, has a proclivity towards someone getting hurt, whether it's pushed over an accident or smoke bombed or a bottle thrown at you or something. No one needs that in their life. I mean, unless you're really passionate about it. I mean, I'm glad that those events attract attention, but then the question always comes, and I ask this in the podcast always, is now what? What now what do we do about this, right? We get it. We're upset with each other. Now what? Because the people that we're voting to do something aren't doing anything, right? They're not passing laws. They're disagreeing on stuff just to disagree on it, just because if blue says this, then red has to say the opposite, and vice versa.
And last congressional cycle, they took the opposing viewpoint because there was another person in power at the time, whether it's speaker or president or whoever. We've got politicians within modern politics that have been on opposing viewpoints of their own opinions multiple times.
Yeah.
So what does that tell us? That tells us that these people who are in power, that for whatever reason, we voted them into power, they're not fit. They're not doing their jobs. If I go to work and one day I do a great job, the next day I decide, you know what, I'm just not really feeling it today. And I'm wishy-washy back and forth. But then somebody else comes in who is maybe just as qualified as I am, but they're consistent. I can't be surprised when I get fired because I'm not doing my job well.
Yeah, it's tough, but we've continuously rewarded lifelong career politicians with
Term limits.
Yeah, and then they just
Term
go into
limits,
another
man.
role, right? They
Yeah.
just go into another role, right? You go from being a congressman to being on your board of supervisors, the county supervisor, a mayor, a governor, whatever you're going to be, and you figure out how to exert that influence somewhere else because you're collecting the money, you owe favors, and they need you to be in power because you can swing the votes.
But that's how our system has been so bastardized from what it was intended to be. Our politicians, when we first started as a young country, they didn't go to DC as a politician and then they set up shop there. It was lawyers and it was doctors and it was farmers who were elected by their local communities to go and represent them. And then when
Temporarily.
they were done,
Yeah.
exactly. And when they were done passing laws doing that job, they went home and they worked. And if they were a doctor, their patients were the people that they represented in DC.
Yeah.
So if they did a bad job, they didn't get to just camp out in DC and ignore it. They had to go back and face those people.
Yeah,
And the people had the power.
and I don't know if we can get back to that because the campaign donors don't want those people. They want someone they can control from the time they're 22 to until they're 62 years old, right? They want someone that's a lifelong employee of Guns Inc. or Pharma Inc. or Oil Inc. or
Sure.
Military Defense, Complex Inc. Because we need you to vote for more tanks. I need you to vote for more missiles. I need you to vote for defense spending because that's what our industry depends on. And by the way, I just gave you $100,000 to your campaign.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that is an argument that many are using nowadays to make campaign donations 100% transparent. I want to see exactly who gave money to who. But then what you got there is now you've got a ready-made doxing list. You've got now
a ready-made what list?
Doxing list. So a doxing list is you have a list of who voted for, let's say, Donald Trump or whoever, even the smallest political campaign. Now you've got a list of exactly who opposes you politically. And we've already seen, whether it's from Republicans or it's from Democrats, that they're very willing to use political power to send a message to people who would step outside of the box or who would rattle the cage. And they can use that political power, even just through the IRS. We've seen through multiple administrations how the IRS has been weaponized and used to silence voices. We've seen recently how social media can be used. Yes, it's a private corporation, but they're operating in sync with messaging being passed down, I believe, from political, whether it's officials or a political campaign or things like that. You've got people who are being kicked off in silence from social media for things that others have done exactly the same and or worse, but it's just a matter of who they voted for or who they're supporting politically right now, and that's the problem. It's justice is supposed to be blind, and right now justice is not blind. You see all the statues of justice in the halls of courtrooms and things like that. Always got a blindfold on. That's very important. That is the crux of our system. And that's not how it's operating today.
It's true. Yeah, I would agree. I would say that's supposed to be the checks and balance in the judicial system. Ideally, as long as they have some exerting power. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it'd be interesting to see. So let me end with this thought as we wrap this up.
Great.
And I want to get your take on it because I've said it a few times in prior podcasts. I don't think people solve these problems. I think it's inevitable that the computers do take over. And that eventually they'll have to solve these problems for us because we're too thick-headed to do it ourselves.
You've watched Westworld, I'm assuming.
I've seen some Westworld. I lost track after about the second season or so, where they're like integrated into society. And
oh man,
yeah. But the first, but even Duke's Ex Machina is another good one. I mean, there's all the top entrepreneurs do believe that that's going to happen. They do believe that robots take over. I mean, we see this happening right now with all the ransomware, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe there's people pushing the buttons, but maybe they made a computer that's smart enough to be able to figure out how to do ransomware.
Sure. If I do this, if I infiltrate this system, what happens to this public utility now? How do people respond?
Right.
There's runs at the gas station. Now people are buying up cases of water. Yeah.
Right. I mean, so, there's a compelling theory where robots, computers, AI get smart enough to figure things out like that, right? Manipulate votes, manipulate data, manipulate media, ransomware people, collect money, influence people, right? You're going to have people pulling the strings because if a computer is giving you money or if it's a pharmaceutical company, you wouldn't know, right? I'm giving you $100,000. I need you to vote this way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And if you're a computer that just ransomwared some meat packaging company for $5 million, guess what? You've got the means to do that now.
Yeah, and you've now effectively crippled a global market.
Yeah, right. So I mean, so
yeah.
That's my theory. It's dystopic. It's not optimistic. All I can hope for is that the computers allow us to live through it and and realize that we can be valuable if we're not fully corrupt. But ideally, they'd realize that this is their planet too, and they need it to be somewhat functioning for them to survive, to have electricity or whatever else computers need to stay alive.
Yeah. I mean, man, that's a whole other theory right there. But no, I totally agree. When you've got so many different big players with billions and probably even trillions of dollars of resources to discovering, the AI race right now is the race. And it's not just, it's not private corporations anymore. It's governments now chasing down that rabbit hole
Yeah.
of, how do we land on the AI first? Because, I totally agree with you. I think that is, I'm not going to say that's going to solve it. I think that's going to be the ultimate doomsday
Might be the outcome.
type.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it'd be the end. Honestly, yeah. I think if
well,
AI
it's not the
was
end. It's
ever,
just the new timeline, right? We go from like an anthropological timeline, right, where people are the most dominant, to some kind of artificial intelligence era.
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
it's
So you
interesting
could
with
say
the
the end of
timing that's going
freedom,
on right
maybe.
now too. Bobby, what do you think of all the revelations of the UFOs and the aliens and stuff like that now?
Oh, it's fascinating to see, because now, again, it's something that we're all looking at. What it used to be American Idol, but now we're all watching social media and we're seeing actual footage, UFOs, and I've seen some of these videos of pilots now. There's a few pilots that I follow this just through podcasts and things, and they've been saying for years, I've seen it. I've seen these things that nobody can explain for me. So where do we go from there? Well, the question is almost kind of irrelevant until we know exactly what it is we're dealing with. Just like with AI, you can say AI could be the salvation, it could be the doom. We don't know until it takes over. And are you willing to risk that? But when it comes to UFOs, now that's something that could be, I mean, the fact that they're here and that we're only kind of able to see them, but we cannot explain propulsion speeds. We cannot explain the fact that it takes off and there's no thermal signature to what's pushing it, and it's defying what we know to be the laws of physics and gravity. I mean, what do you do from there?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, all you have to do is accept that there's something that's here, or some things, or multiple some things that are here, that are way more advanced than us. And if they wanted to harm us, they could. But since
Yeah,
they
exactly.
haven't, we're probably okay.
Right. You would assume that if they had the capability to either harm us and or take over in whatever it is, use our resources, or use us as a resource, maybe they would have done it by now.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
think I
probably a
think they're
silver
here,
lining.
for the same reason we watch American Idol. This is kind of like Earth Idol. Like, let's just see what's going on, because
I like that theory.
these humans do some dumb shit, and let's see what they do.
Exactly. Let's not interfere, because if we start intervening, maybe we're going to fix their problems. Let's just kind of sit back and let them do what they do naturally, because this is
Yeah,
pretty freaking
I
entertaining.
would say that most of them are drones. It'll be interesting if they come out through the congressional reports that they do actually have crashed planes, crashed drones, actual alien bodies, and things like that, that they're kind of hinting at. Because then now that opens a whole nother can of worms. Like, okay, now we've got this stuff. What have you reverse engineered from it? What have you figured out?
Right.
Because just seeing something on a radar and never having actual physical evidence is different than, visual evidence. Right.
Right. Right.
Anyways, we're down another a rabbit hole right there. So, Bobby, I appreciate having you on the show and sharing that this positive outlook. That you're right. More of us are in common, have more in common with everyone else than not. And the easy first step is family. Pretty much everyone except for psychopaths and loners love their family. You could
Yeah.
you could bring that up. Hey, do you love your mom and dad? How about, do you have kids? Yep, I bet you love them. You got, family that you don't get along with? Probably. So do I. So we all got this.
Yeah,
And so
yeah, and we're all going to ultimately try to err on that side of doing what's best for our families. And I've seen the theory. This is another one you maybe could talk about sometime. But self-preservation and being a little bit selfish about becoming the best I can be and doing the best for my family. Maybe that really is what's best for the country. Is if we just take care of, not just take care of ourselves and our own, but be the best that we can be, and then translate that to how we treat each other. And I think
100%. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean,
that's to
kind of take
solve
care
it.
of yourself and ideally treat others the way you'd want to be treated. Simple golden rule type stuff.
Yeah.
And we should get a long way. What you don't want is other people telling you what to do.
Yeah. Freedom is something that we all kind of cling to, whether it's from every standpoint. Freedom to do X, Y, and Z. Freedom's a
Right.
very powerful thing.
Right. Bobby, thanks for joining me on this another great episode of I've Got a Theory. I'm your host, Henish. Thanks for joining me, Bobby. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, Henish. Take care.